Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the weekly update for the week beginning May 4th. Hard to believe it's May already. I don't know where April went. It just kind of blew by. I've spent the last week spending a lot of time with accountants, lawyers, consultants, trying to figure out a lot of the details on the PPP loan and the loan forgiveness provisions that are supplied by Congress and the SBA. We've spent, the legislation was really rushed through without a lot of the details, and we were lucky to get a loan, but we have to make sure that we're tracking all of our expenses accordingly to make sure that we obtain the maximum forgiveness on the loan. Unfortunately, the SBA was a bit vague when they came out with the details on the PPP loan, and so it seems like every week we're obtaining new guidance, and we have to make sure we're on top of those rules in order to make sure we get the maximum forgiveness. I spent part of Sunday afternoon listening to a webinar from our accounting firm highlighting some of the issues, and Sue and I'll be talking a bit about what we need to do to make sure that we actually qualify and get the maximum forgiveness. And since the month of April just kind of blew by, I completely forgot that back on April 10th was my father's birthday. And toward the end of last week, as we were beginning the beginning of May, I thought, gosh, didn't Dad die on May 1st? And so I went and actually went back to his obituary and double-checked the date, and I was right. He died on May 1st in the year 2000, so that was 20 years ago on Friday, and Lee reminded me that May 1st is her anniversary with Bursch Travel. She's been with us for 32 years, and so she remembered coming to the funeral shortly after. I think the funeral was maybe on May 4th. So today in my video, I want to just highlight a bit about my father and my father's history in Alexandria. I know some of you know quite a bit of the story of Bursch Travel, but I thought there are still a number of people that are new with us in the last few years, or maybe even since we had our 60th anniversary in Las Vegas. So I thought I'd put together a little video to give you a little bit more history of my father's life in Alexandria. So stay tuned. We'll have some other pictures coming shortly. Some of you have this picture of my father in your office. It was taken on his 75th birthday. You'll see he was born in 1913. His family moved to a small farm on the outskirts of Alexandria. It was located on Birch Avenue. I've been trying to convince the city they should change it to Bursch Avenue. My father was only 6 months old when they moved to Alexandria, and his father was a manager of a grain elevator, and unfortunately he was killed in a car train accident in 1923, leaving a widow with 7 kids on that small 80-acre farm. And my father was the youngest in the family, and you can imagine 1923, and then graduating from high school in 1931 in the midst of the Great Depression. He ended up graduating near the top of his class and ended up leaving home when he was 18 years old. He said he left home, he had a dime in his pocket. And I often asked him, Dad, why'd you leave home if you only had a dime in your pocket? And he said, well, my mother had even less, and if I stayed at home, she had to feed me. So he left Alexandria and hitchhiked to New Orleans looking for work along the way, and he would get to a particular town at night, and if he needed a place to sleep, he would go check in with the local jail or police department and see if they had a cot or an empty cell where he could sleep. In one case, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he stayed at the Peabody Hotel, but he was befriended by the night detective who let him sleep on a couch in the lobby. And Just amazing story of perseverance as he looked for work in 1931. Unfortunately, he didn't really find anything, came back to Alexandria and borrowed enough money from his sister to go to St. Olaf in Northfield, Minnesota, and he attended St. Olaf for one semester and then ran out of money and came back to Alexandria to work. He ended up doing odd jobs, working, anything he could find that would give him a little bit of money. And in the summer of 1932, he actually went to a county fair and bought a raffle ticket and won a car. And he ended up using that car to drive people back and forth to Minneapolis and just anything he could use that car for to make a buck. And when fall came, he sold the car and went back to St. Olaf for another semester. And he always told people that he had attended St. Olaf for 2 years, but it really was 2 semesters in 2 separate years. Interesting story was that his college roommate was Karl Rovog, who ended up becoming governor of Minnesota back in the 1960s. His father was a professor at St. Olaf, and so my father had many fond memories of St. Olaf. I'm kind of surprised that he never took me to St. Olaf to look at the college and or encouraged me to go there. He really left it up to me to go wherever I want. When World War II came around, he was working for Montgomery Ward's out in Watertown, South Dakota. He was the assistant manager of a department store there, and he was drafted into the Army. And because of his age and some college experience and his management experience, he was commissioned an officer in the Army and served in the Quartermaster Corps, which was involved with buying supplies and sending supplies over to the troops really throughout the country or the world. He actually was injured in an accident in World War II and was discharged from the Army, and he went back to Montgomery Ward's in Watertown. And while he was in Watertown, he heard about a bar that was for sale in a neighboring small town, and he went out to take a look at this bar and restaurant. And they went out to visit it on a Friday night, and the bar and restaurant was so busy that they couldn't get in the front door. They talked to the owner, and the owner wanted to sell the business because he was getting old and he just couldn't handle it any longer because it was so busy. So my father ended up buying that bar and restaurant, and it turned out to be quite a gold mine for him, although he was there only a couple of years because he wasn't married yet, but my mother did not want to move to this small little town. Probably had a population of 100 or 200 people, and so my father ended up selling the bar and restaurant, and that small investment over a couple of years really helped pave the way for his financial future. He ended up moving to Sioux Falls. He and my mother got married, and he became the sales manager of a wholesale appliance company in Sioux Falls and traveled throughout South Dakota. You could mention a town in South Dakota and he'd tell you who the dealer was. I mean, he had an incredible memory for people's names and personal history about them. He was really ultimate salesman. So we fast forward to 1950s, and I was born in Sioux Falls in 1951, and in 1956 my parents decided to move back to Alexandria, my father's hometown, where they purchased the Bus Depot Cafe, which was a restaurant that also served as the Greyhound Bus Depot. And my father had 2 sisters in Alexandria. One was recently divorced and another was recently widowed, and he moved back to help the 2 of them find jobs. So his 2 sisters went to work for him in the kitchen in the restaurant, and Mom and Dad sold bus tickets. I grew up kind of learning how to read the official bus guide, which was like the old official airline guide where you could look up bus routes from city to city. And back in those days, there were 40 buses a day that would come through Alexandria on their way to Fargo and headed west. And so the restaurant was open 24 hours a day and was quite busy. And yet during the winter months, business really slowed down quite a bit. And so getting into the travel business and starting to talk to people about travel in other times of the year was really the start of Bursch Travel. Here is a picture of the house on Bryant Street that they rented for the first couple of years when they moved back to Alexandria. In 1958, Mom and Dad purchased this lot at the other end of Bryant Street and built this new house. This is where I spent most of my formative years. My father was very involved in the community, serving on the Planning Commission, the school board, and then was elected senator from the area in 1966. So I don't want to take too much more time here today on the video, but as you can see from my father's history, things were never really easy for him, and yet he persevered and made a success of the business. And really the same is true for us today. We face challenges that we've never seen before, but you think about the people that grew up in the early 1900s or went through the Depression and World War II, they had never seen things that they had never seen before either. So somehow they pulled up their boots and worked their way through it and got through it, and so will we. So in memory of Dad, I hope all of you have a good week this week, and I look forward to speaking with you in your individual meetings here this coming week. Thanks.